The head of the APEC Secretariat says rules that govern global trade are dated and finding consensus on reform is difficult. Eduardo Pedrosa told CNA that subsidies and the dispute settlement mechanism are key areas that need to be addressed by the World Trade Organization. He was speaking on the final day of the bloc's trade ministers meeting in Jeju, South Korea, where all 21 economies agreed on a joint statement. CNA's Lim Yun Suk tells us more.
Trade ministers and representatives gathered on Jeju Island for 2 days to hold their first multilateral trade meeting since U.S. President Donald Trump entered the White House and announced sweeping tariffs that hit more than half of the 21 members of the bloc. Following the meetings, they adopted a joint statement that cited fundamental challenges facing the global trading system, but said they remain committed to APEC as the main forum for regional economic cooperation. At a press conference on Friday, South Korean Trade Minister In-kyo said the member economies also gave support for the World Trade Organization, or WTO, the reforms were needed.
투명하고 예측 가능한 투자 환경 조성에 대한 APEC의 의지를 재확인하게 되었습니다. 한편 WTO가 최근 통상 환경 변화에 부응할 수 있도록 포괄적이고 의미 있는 개혁이 이루어져야 한다는 점에 공감하였습니다.
He said there were difficulties in getting the joint statement agreed by all countries, but was proud it was achieved.
예로부터 평화와 신뢰를 중시하고 공동체 정신을 철학으로 삼아왔던 제주에서 치열하게 토론하고 고민하여 기념비적인 합의를 도출한 것을 매우 기쁘게 생각하며 저는 제주의 기적이라고 표현하고 싶습니다.
Several bilateral talks, including one between the U.S. and China on Thursday, took place on the sidelines. And on Friday, U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer also met with South Korea's Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy, Duk-geun. Local reports cited Minister An as saying after the meeting that a Korean delegation will be visiting the United States next week for a second round of tariff negotiations. The two countries last month agreed in Washington that they would reach some kind of a deal by July. The meetings took place amid political uncertainties in South Korea, where currently there is no leader. South Koreans will go to the polls to elect a new president on June 3rd. And whoever becomes the new president will likely follow up on negotiations with the U.S. as soon as possible. Mr. Greer also met the executive vice chairman of South Korea's largest shipbuilder, Hyundai Heavy, Chung Gi-son. Hyundai said Mr. Chung emphasized the need to strengthen shipbuilding cooperation between the two countries. Lim Yun Suk, CNA, Jeju Island, South Korea.
Eduardo Pedrosa, he's executive director of the APEC Secretariat, lays out what he sees as shortcomings at the World Trade Organization and explains why it finds it so hard to reform.
There was a lot of discussion during our meetings about backing up the World Trade Organization. And they were very frank about these issues and finding issues where we could come to agreement. It was very clear, for example, that the trade rules are somewhat behind the curve. We don't have something that really covers e-commerce. There are other issues that are on the table, which we call the joint statement initiatives. We're looking at subsidies for fish, and these are all issues that were well addressed. So yes, the atmospheres at Jeju were extremely positive, and people really did see common ground on how to address this with a specific focus on what can we do to improve the WTO, including its rulemaking and dispute settlement mechanism.
Despite his recognition of the need to reform global trading rules, Mr. Pedrosa is still upbeat and sees the value of APEC as a platform to find common ground.
It really plants the seeds for further discussions in the lead up to the APEC Leaders Week coming up at the end of October. I mean, this is the first meeting to take place after the Switzerland talks. So we're very happy with the amount of space that was created then, and it really created a platform for not just China and the US to speak again, but for other economies in the region to engage in those discussions and how the current trading environment affects them. I think all of the trade ministers that were there tried to have discussions with Ambassador Greer, and I understand that there is success in that. So we are very hopeful on what will come out of that. On the 90-day reprieve, there's still time for all of the region's economies to make progress on these issues. And of course, the APEC meetings did provide that platform for the bilateral discussions and finding mutual landing zones on what are the US concerns, what are each other's concerns. So I keep a very positive outlook on this. I mean, if we think about where we were at the beginning of April and where we are now, that's an enormous change in outlook that we see. And APEC's value was really demonstrated here in providing a way forward and a way to engage each other on these issues.